Hey, we're back. So, any new faces today?
We have a few, I believe.
There we go. Jump in, John, Albert.
Yeah. Hey guys. So I'm not exactly sure how I found out about this, but I'm glad I did, and I enjoyed the breakout I just had. I have a startup called From the Experts, and we are a networking accelerator that drives innovation through people and technology. And we're like a TED Talk with interaction. And so we bring on an expert who is going to talk about something very specifically they're challenged with in the day. And then we have a group of industry experts between 40 and 50, but not too big, like this meeting, where you can actually get people interacting with each other. We've been doing it for about 2 years. We've had a lot of great content, and the whole purpose is when you show up for that 45 minutes, you should be leaving with not only connections, but new ideas and maybe a breakthrough. Who knows?
That's awesome. Well, welcome to the group. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Albert, what's happening?
Yeah, it's really, really good to be here. So a little bit of context. I was introduced to this by John Younger, who does a lot of work around future of HR, future of work, who I met as part of a roundtable program by the British government to improve freelance support and infrastructure for British freelancers. I run a company called Underpinned, which at the moment is quite UK focused, although we have early customers in Europe and the US, and we're very much looking to start moving to the US, but we focus on professional education around freelancing. Although our product is actually a SaaS product. So we are a software system that helps people build freelance businesses, very much focused on lead generation, business building, rather than the traditional marketplace platform for freelancers, focusing on skilled freelancers who work in a project-based format and how they build successful businesses. But education is a key part of that, because I don't think anyone has ever left university, high school, or full-time employment being like, hey, I have all these amazing commercializable skills and I know how to commercialize them. They leave with like, I have all these amazing skills and I have no idea how to commercialize them. Right. And so a big hurdle we have to get over is teaching people how to build a business proposition around their skills and crafts, and how to actually use our tools to then go and build something. And we work with a lot of universities in the UK to do that.
Oh man, that's super cool. I'm so psyched you joined. This is a perfect session for you to be a part of, and looking forward to your participation for sure. Anybody else that's new?
Yeah, so my name is DJ.
Hey, DJ.
I'm based in Annapolis, Indiana. I see some of my colleagues here, Todd and Mafe. They're from Harvard Business School Analytics program. I just wrapped up and graduated last week, but my background is, my forte is in product management. I've spent 10 to 15 years in product management space, worked for startups and companies like Siebel, Oracle. Last gig was with Salesforce. And then while I was in Harvard, I had this opportunity to actually start my small consulting company, which I was still at school. And so I had this opportunity to work with Mass General Hospital on one of their clinical research program, where I'm acting right now as a design thinking and a data science advisor for a platform that we are building for caregivers for Alzheimer's disease patients. So there's a lot that's happening in the market of mental and behavioral health, and the platform is actually focused on supporting the caregivers for Alzheimer's disease patients. So I've been working with them in an advisory role for almost a year now. And now, since I'm kind of graduated, I'm just thinking what the next best opportunity and alignment is for me at this.
Awesome. Well, welcome. What a great project. I'm super passionate about the mental health space, and I'm glad that you're putting your energies there. It's really an awesome thing. It looks like we've also got Philip.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm calling from Belgium. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Leuven, Belgium, and I'm studying all kinds of fluid work arrangements within traditional organizations. So I was introduced to this meeting by Lisa Nelson from the US government, and I worked with them and her basically to study their internal marketplace called Open Opportunities. It's a project, maybe some of you know it. It's a platform that allows permanent employees to do temporary assignments and projects across the federal government, basically. So I wrote a paper on that, happy to share it as well. I'm doing all kinds of other projects on kind of liquid work arrangements within organizations. So I'm happy to be here, thank you.
That's awesome. Hey, be sure you share your paper or a link to your paper in the chat. We'd love to see it, and certainly something that I'm thinking a lot about as I write this book. So thanks for that.
Okay, definitely.
And Athrav, you're new too.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Atharva. I'm 21 years old from India, and I just graduated from my undergraduate degree in electronics engineering. And during my undergrad, I also had started my small technology venture called Allskyr, wherein I made a couple of drones and underwater IoT systems for environment monitoring, because sustainability is an area which is quite close to what I want to do. And I think also I got a job offer from Deloitte as an analyst, so kind of happy to join this year. And yeah, looking forward to learn a lot from you guys. Thank you.
That's awesome. You got to connect with Balaji. He's the man. Yeah. So awesome. Anybody else? No? Well, very cool. Well, just an update for you guys. So the book's coming along pretty well. I finally, I think I said last week, cracked the code on the kind of the structure and the process, and just really going deep, in the case studies and trying to support that structure. So feel pretty good. I think there's 7 parts, and we've got 100,000 words written, and we're just trying to recontextualize it and build things out. And so, of the 7 sections, 5 are in the can, and getting there pretty quickly now. So stoked to kind of get to that place. Now I'll be calling on all of you, and I think we'll make sure that the manuscript's available to a lot of people beforehand, because I want this community to really lean into it and help make sure we've got it in the right space. It's been, a little crazy to write a book on something that's changing so fast. So, fun, but also a little bit difficult when you wake up in the morning and everything you thought yesterday is different today. So I'm super stoked for today's conversation, just because I think that the idea of upskilling, is something that Steve Rader and I have been talking about for a really, really long time. Steve was a passionate proponent of the upskilling thing way before I could even understand how that fit into the ecosystem. So it's always, Steve's always ahead of all of us and all this stuff. But anyway, it really kind of hit home the other day, because I did a podcast with Shoba from Hardskills. Hey, Brandon, can you just make sure that you get that link into that podcast?
Yep.
That'd be awesome. But it was a great conversation, and really, really enjoyed it. And so you guys can listen to it if you'd like. But anyway, I thought it'd be really fun to bring a bunch of folks on and talk about this. And I'm going to give it over to you, Steve, because you've been like I said, you've been the leader since the beginning of this idea, and really thoughtful about how we think about this. I'd love for this just to be a dialogue with a bunch of folks, because I think there's so much more we can do, and there's so much opportunity here for the CTW to play a part here. So Steve, take it away.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about today. One, I just listened to the podcast interview with Shoba, and so I'm excited to hear kind of how you want to play in here. And then Albert, just hearing you talk about your new platform that's really going to play into this. Let me just start with some kind of big picture stuff about this, because I think upskilling is one of the most important topics of our time. We are kind of in this space where all of the triangle of jobs, where there used to be all these low skill jobs that are now being automated and reduced, and at the same time we have all these high skill jobs that are being multiplied, but we don't have the workforce. We've got to find a way as a society to actually move people from that low skill into that high skill. And a lot of you are really familiar with the World Economic Forum report that came out. In fact, I think somebody posted something of a Coursera course. Gavin, I think that was you that actually was quoting all of that World Economic Forum report about how much upskilling has to happen, and how little normal businesses' budgets account for training. And this kind of struggle between the full-time traditional organization and this new emerging platform-based gig work. And we're really just watching that, and really interested to know, what are the roles and responsibilities? Who's taking on this new kind of monumental task. And it doesn't seem to be the universities. Universities seem to be very much clinging to their old ways, and they just can't keep up with this rapid change that's kind of behind it all. So I want to throw that out there. I'd love to talk about some of the new learning opportunities that are out there, both free and some of the new paid stuff, to talk about what are platforms doing and why, and what is their role in some of these new open talent platforms. But like I said, I think this is one of the most important things that we are talking about these days, because the gig workforce can move at a velocity and train much faster than a traditional workforce ever could. And we can talk a little bit about why that's the case. I will just give one anecdote of when I became really more passionate about this. And John, I think you were there for when I was at the Top Coder Open, and I was running a panel of some of their top freelancers. And I asked the question of Tomas, one of their great top freelancers. I said, how much of your time as an independent do you spend learning new software skills, new platforms, new things? And he floored me when he said 60%. And I know I've told this story before, but it kind of blew my mind that anybody, I asked him, like, how do you ever make any money? You know, you're only working 40% of your time. And he goes, oh no, because I'm focusing on the latest and greatest skills, because I know this stuff, I'm really valuable, and I'm making a ton of money in that 40% of my time. And it's just a different way of thinking, right? So that's my little spiel. I will try to not talk now. Shoba, let's start with you. Kind of, you guys had some great conversations. You might want to recap some of that, but what is where are you coming from on this, and kind of what are your big takeaways you have for the group?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So good to meet all of you again. I haven't been on for a while, but really it's interesting, your starting point of skilling being a really monumental issue. And what in the last 2 months, I just came back to Berlin, where I'm based, after 2 months in Southeast Asia. And the attitudes to skilling are very, very different. It's all very positive. The market opportunity is massive. Everybody wants to get skilled, but it was interesting to see the reasons people want to get skilled and how that's changing and how it is different in these two different geographies, right? Because in Southeast Asia and in India, India accounts for 20% of the world's workforce, right? So that's a pretty decisive force. People can't get enough of skilling, right? Because it's the only route up, right? It's the escape route for most people in emerging markets. And yet, one of those markets in Asia is Singapore. And we definitely see a different attitude change where it's, oh my God, do I have to get skilled? And we see some of that in the more mature markets, right? Like in Western Europe. It's something that people are doing, kicking and screaming, very much like what most people do with compliance training. So I think it is a very interesting picture that's forming. And I think what we are moving into now is a more discerning perspective on learning, right? It's more strategic. And I'm excited about the open talent angle on this, because as you said, right, the top end of that triangle has so much power to set pricing, but also the nature of work that they want. And to stay at that top, you have to, that's the lifelong learning conundrum, right?
I think that's wonderful. I really, that all resonates with me. It's interesting. I like the way you divide the markets like that, because I think that's really true. And in the kind of the Western world, if you will, just that different mindset about learning. If people are in full-time jobs, they are literally incentivized, if you think about it, to not go and learn, because
Yeah.
in their mindset, the company should pay for that. That, I think I pull out a stat I got a while back, was $1,000 per employee per year is the average training budget. And that's mostly compliance, like you said. So we're coming from this full-time employment culture where there's not enough funding, and therefore there's not upskilling because you can't afford it. And yet you're seeing the World Economic Forum report saying, 50% of people will need reskilling, and of those 40% of their skills have to change, and that's going to require 1 to 5 months worth of training. Nobody's budget's there for that. And then on the freelance side, you're starting to see people kind of doing it. I think too, there's this kind of hybridization going on where people are working full-time jobs with a little part-time gig, and they're using that part-time gig as an impetus to learn something new, whether that's working on an open innovation challenge or actually doing a gig. And that hybridization, I think, especially during COVID, certainly looks like it's driving people to go, oh my gosh, I want to work my passion. I want to learn something new. And they're kind of catching and kind of escaping from that full-time norm. I see Albert nodding his head a lot, so I want to hear kind of your perspective on this, because it sounds like this is resonating.
For sure. I have so much to say, so I'm going to try and sit down to a few most important things that pop to my head. I'm kind of making notes as I go. So we're very much focused on the softer skills side of things. We teach people how to build a business around their craft. But what we've noticed is some really, really interesting attributes of how people approach hard skills. So I want to make a few specific points on what's been discussed. One is the relationship between the employer and the employee. Even if you are in a linear employment format and you are a full-time employee, there is no longer the same sentiment around, I'm going to be here forever. You're there for a few years and then you're going to move on. So the incentive for the company to invest in your education is associated with a much higher sense of risk. Now, so you have this kind of, and if you take that to the freelance market, where some of these businesses are hiring majority of their workforce as freelancers, the incentive, or rather the risk associated with educating them in hard skills, is even more increased, because you're basically giving them the skills to go and be paid more by other people. Now, what's really, really interesting about that is if you look at the opposite side of this, you have people coming out of full-time education going, am I really valuable? Surely I'm really valuable now because I know loads of stuff, but they've never been taught the soft side of things, which is why are you worth loads? Why are you worth loads? What is the problem that you're specifically able to solve? And where does that fit into the commercial context of the industries you're interested in? So what we're seeing is we have a load of people coming out of university, higher education, further education, or employment going, I have all these skills, but I don't really know how to iterate those skills towards something valuable because I just have them. And I'm used to I've been taught in a system that is designed for linear employment. And you have employers going why would I invest in hard skills? I'm basically telling them they should go be paid more somewhere else. So one of the things that we've really focused on is talking to university students, people moving from full-time employment, that in the UK, it's a quarter of the adult working population have a side hustle. So we're focusing on going, hey, that's fantastic. You have something you're interested in. Fantastic. You have these skills. Yes, they are commercializable, but you need to learn how to commercialize them. And if you learn how to commercialize them, you'll also be able to more acutely identify what you should be improving. And if you talk about spending 60% of your time upskilling, that's great. But if you're not using that effectively within the market that you're trying to get into, you might be learning the wrong skills to solve the wrong problems for the wrong people.
That is absolutely, and I do see there's a whole emerging kind of coaching business coming out, trying to help people to navigate that. I want to come back to some, Carrie, you commented 60% of the time learning, the other 75% business DevOps. I think that's really interesting because that very much is from a traditional freelancer position, which is that you've got to generate all your business. And there's another piece to that that's emerging, right, which is the platform-based freelancer, where the business comes to them. They actually don't have to do that. And I think that's one of the things that I've been really watching is how are platforms playing a different role than the traditional freelance model, where they start taking care of your marketing, your finances. They're kind of taking care of making sure you get paid. Some of them are upskilling, right? Early on, we talked with Michael Burdick was on the calls, and he talked about how his AI actually assigns work based on where you are skill-wise, so that you're always kind of stretching in your next assignment. So you're constantly upskilling, right? And then Tom O'Malley talks about how his platform kind of trains people, but uses them for crowd work all at the same time as they as they graduate through. So there's these really novel kind of platform concepts. And I know Top Coders instituted whole academies of learning where they're trying to get people through different kinds of upskilling as part of the platform. Let's talk a little bit about what is this new platform thing and what are you guys seeing and what is their responsibility? Carrie, I'll let you go first. It's Carrie, you brought it up if you wanted to say anything on it.
Sure. Actually, I was just typing to you in the chat. I mean, this is not my model, but I don't know a lot of people who get a lot of business through the platforms. So I don't think we've reached, they're taking a huge percentage, the ones that I look at for information. And so I think that's super tricky. I mean, I still have to do a lot of business development to, work on the projects that I work on and the clients that I have.
Yeah, there's definitely this big diverse set of what freelancing is. And I think there are pockets where that is very much the model and others where it's not. Somebody else, I heard somebody chime in there. Was that Balaji?
Yeah, Steve, I agree with Carrie. I think given the volume of people that they have, I think their job is fundamentally to ensure that they get the attention compared to the other marketplaces that are also trying to get attention. Versus when the people show up there, then it is the people have to compete with each other. The places where there's actually, you don't have to truly market are the old school contingent vendors. If you are with the Allegiances and the Manpowers or the Randstad of the world, they sell at volume, and then you get staffed onto projects. So, I just think marketplaces have struggled to provide that consistent income stream to people. Yeah. In the end, they are supposed to be, neutral. They bring supply and they bring demand, and the demand and supply is to find each other.
I wonder if we're thinking of this as a permanency thing when we should maybe think of this as a transient phenomenon. In other words, maybe what's going on more is that the open innovation crowds and the open talent crowds are being used as a upskilling and discovery and reputation building mechanism until you get to a critical mass where you can actually have enough clients that have used you and have enough connections. But what do you guys think? Albert, I see you shaking your head the other way. So I love this kind of back and forth.
We basically did a piece of research on our primary function is how do you take somebody who wants to be a freelancer and make them successful as quickly as possible. We identified that there are 3 categories of freelancer. There is an early stage freelancer or aspiring freelancer. There is the fumble years, as we call them, the first 3 to 5 years, where the vast majority of people give up or fail. And then we have established freelancers. And there was only one defining characteristic of an established freelancer that we were able to identify. They had one of 2 things. They either had a successful professional network from which they drew all of their work, or they had a successful system for building a professional network. The main reason for failure of freelancers in the fumble years was using platforms as their primary source of getting work. And what we found was if people avoided the platform altogether, the speed at which they were able to build an established professional network was significantly quicker. And the anecdote that I always use is I pretend I'm having a conversation with my business partner and I say, hey, Jack, do you know a developer that does X? And Jack goes, yeah, I know a guy called Steve. And I go, hey, call Steve. The other scenario is, hey, do you know a developer that does X? No. Should we put a brief online and have hundreds of people pitch for it? Would you rather be Steve or one of the hundreds of people pitching? And so what we try and teach people is very quickly articulate the niche that you want to do. The second pointer, which is really important, most of the businesses that you will successfully get work with don't know they need you until you pitch them. Small businesses have built their whole economy on lead generation by proposing a value proposition where you invest Y and you get X out. And freelancers start to have that attitude. Their ability to be successful is significantly higher and the time it takes to do so is significantly shorter. So I would avoid, my advice to people is only use platforms as a fallback for generating cash in the short term.
So this is really interesting, right? Because this entire community has been talking lots of different angles on this. Anybody want to weigh in?
Hey, I'm Steve. This is Ray Wolf. I'll jump in just a little bit different here. I know a lot of times with upskilling, when you start the conversation, it's the absence of the skill. And what we work with a lot of large employers, we don't accept that as the base assumption. We actually challenge them and say, do you actually have it inside the company? And are you enabling that skill to be applied to whatever the need is? And I will tell you, we're a significant amount of time, we're finding that there's great skill inside the company that is not being applied correctly. And you know, I posted some comments, but most of the folks are working at the bottom of their skill range.
Yeah.
And I listen into upskilling as getting people working at the upper end of their skill range so they can do things that are more important to the business. And we do, I'll say corporate America does a great job of saddling talented people with a bunch of administrative stuff.
Right.
That doesn't let them emerge. So
nice.
I think the other thing also is, you know, there is this emphasis in companies to upskill, and they want you, and you're right, there's a lot of talent that's untapped, but upskilling doesn't always mean you're freed of the you know, of the day job number one, right? So the incentive for people isn't fully there either.
Gotcha. Okay. I want to pivot things a little bit to talk about where is upskilling happening? How are things changing? I was at speaking at a conference in Sydney a couple of years ago, and one of the other speakers was the founder of General Assembly. Am I familiar with General Assembly? It's really fascinating because at the time where all these free online platforms were popping up and universities were starting new programs, they basically started taking over hotel rooms and offering these courses, but not for no money. Like there was significant money. It wasn't, you know, at night, it was in the middle of the day. It was this really interesting, like pop-up kind of university almost, and bringing in a lot of practitioners and accessing a bunch of new kinds of teachers, but still vetted, still something that folks could use. And they've been doing gangbusters, right? There's also folks on the free side, like IBM, Amazon, Google, and others have all kind of set up free courses that folks can go through. Lots of different stuff going on here. And I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to weigh in on what's happening here. And is anyone seeing academia actually changing what they've been doing to address some of the trying to keep pace with the change?
If I can just step up, there's just two quick points, if I may. One is when we're talking about, I think I can offer this as something of a bridge, but I do want, the research that I've done indicates that there's a difference in terms of the entire experience for what we've been describing as highly skilled as opposed to, let's say, moderately skilled jobs or work requirements. And I think the highly skilled person and the for lack of a better phrase, blue collar person has an entirely different experience in the workplace these days. I think we ought to address that difference. And it sounds to me like we're talking about upskilling, and it's only affecting the highly skilled person who's going to become more highly skilled, rather than the blue collar or who's moving boxes, for example, with an ankle bracelet at a warehouse. Their experience, their needs, with their skill set, right, is going to be entirely different. Second, I have my experience. I have direct experience, although it's anecdotal, with what academia is doing with this whole ecosystem. And that's the phrase that I see most, so I don't have to invent something else. But I'm a mentor for new lawyers here in Tennessee through the Tennessee Bar Association, and most of the people that I speak with are just gobsmacked when I talk to them about this whole about having to find work, about having to upskill. Professionally, we're required to do some upskilling every year, but ultimately, I think we need one. I agree wholeheartedly that academia is not doing enough or the right things, and two, I would like to see. I'd like to make sure that we we stay aware of the difference between that is developing. I think only more between what we're calling blue collar and what we're calling highly skilled work.
And I think this is, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, Mafe's on here and Link's on here, and all part of the CTW work stream that's about worker advocacy, which is very much the starting point of that group. So if you're interested in this, this is very much something CTW is working to try to figure out, because when I talk about the societal need, our societal need for upskilling isn't to get the smart people smarter. Like there's a demand there, granted, but the need that's going to keep the pitchforks at bay, and like that's what happens when people don't actually have work at massive levels, then that's the real societal. So I agree, platforms, especially learning platforms, have to figure out how to actually actively reach out and start bringing everyone up. I think there is a misconception that everyone doesn't need to actually start learning digital skills and other skills. Like everyone's going to need that. So there's also this kind of bar of what's expected for everyone just to participate in a modern society that's going to be interesting as well. Okay, I said a lot there. Others?
I think Link has a question.
Yeah, just a couple of comments and a couple of points. And Steve, thank you for plugging the advocacy group. And I'll announce that probably a little bit later before the end of the call. We have monthly calls scheduled next month. But anyway, I wanted to go back to the point about where is education upskilling going and where are universities at? And I'm seeing a lot of partnerships and stuff like it with Harvard, for example, working with Berkeley, looking at all of these new technology programs that give the professional an ability to kind of upskill their efforts in a variety of arenas. We see that happening, but the universities that provide four-year degree programs are really going, oh man, we're still invested all of our money into on-campus living and on-campus life for the 18 to 24-year-old. What are we going to do to now switch gears to provide those bachelor's degrees to more people? So I think that they're still catching up in a way to leverage online education. In the meantime, you have your basic, blue collar jobs that already look for upskilling opportunities, but they go through things like YouTube and places like that that provide free educations on, for example, mechanics and things of that nature, and construction and the how-to DIY stuff. But when it comes to the upskilling and education piece, there's this disjunction, right? There's disjointed where the work platforms are realizing they can't provide every job to every worker, and that they're really focusing on, somebody had mentioned, I think David mentioned, are there, the what I call featured platforms, and the featured platforms might be tailored to a certain type of worker or a certain population. Their job is really the motor to power the car, a motor to connect the worker to the job, but not so much to reinvent the wheel on, let's go ahead and create an education program that upskills the workers that are coming through our platform. There's not enough retention rates on those platforms. People find work and move on. What needs to happen, in my opinion, is these platforms that are providing the work and the connection need to be the link to those upskilling platforms, and to say, these are the ones we found are really good and provide low cost, blah, blah, blah. Here, go ahead and go there. Meanwhile, it's driving traffic to those platforms so that they can be improving what opportunities that they're providing.
So that's what's interesting.
The direction we're headed.
Oh, sorry. That's what's interesting. Like if you look, I think there's two kinds of communities, like the open talent platforms that just trying to get people, matched with work and take them overhead, or one. The other side of that, though, are these open innovation platforms where they are much more about a passion around something. So Top Coder is much more about learning and platform and trying to be a community. And you do see a lot more learning going on those passion platforms. So it's funny because some of the platforms are hybrid, but you definitely see curated communities going a different way. But I like what you're saying there. Art, you've had your hand up there. Then I want to come back to something.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that I've seen, and I'll be brief, I promise. One of the things that I've seen is that from a higher ed perspective, it tends to be the local community colleges that are particularly targeting the folks that are in the lower wage professions. And those partnerships are great. I'll say from a government perspective, I'm not talking, the government agencies like yours that are doing the work, Steve, but more so the workforce development agencies that are trying to tackle these issues. there's a huge gap between what they're doing and what needs to be done, right? So they focus predominantly on full-time employment, permanent placement jobs, right? And in fact, when I was working on the program that some of you guys have heard me talk about, we went to the state and we said, hey, we're building this workforce development program. They put us in touch with the Workforce Development Agency. And then we got, oh, sorry, we can't work with you guys. You're a staffing company, right? So, and we're like, okay, well, we're still going to do it. We just don't get any of the tax credits, the incentives, anything that everybody else is getting. So there's this huge gap between the roughly, the data I've seen is roughly 40% of folks that fall under the contingent model that's expected to go to 60% by 2030, and the workforce development efforts that are being focused on only FTEs. So I'll drop a couple links in chat. But other than that,
good.
Appreciate it.
And there are some interesting things in government going on there. I think I forget who the new person was, or that somebody was talking about open. No, it was there was Philip. Philip was talking about open opportunities that Lisa Nelson has been behind putting kind of this job. So there are some forces. OPM in the U.S. government is very much trying to work some of those, but I think the problem is the when the rubber hits the road, it's state and local, and that's a much bigger bear to hit. Let's see, did Carrie come back? Carrie, I love the fact that whenever we type into the chat upskilling, it comes up UPS killing. That's just one of my favorite things about this topic. Talk more about what Scott Galloway's got. A lot of us know him a bit, but I think he made some good points that I'd love for you to kind of highlight that.
Oh yeah, so he's a former client of mine, and he's a serial entrepreneur, clinical professor at NYU, and has a couple of podcasts. And so he continues to talk about the fact that higher education has priced itself as a luxury good. And he even has a really interesting database out that is findable where he ranks the value of certain colleges based on criteria that he set. So he's very passionate about the topic of, it ultimately gets to like who we are as a society. How do we develop a workforce? How do we take care of people, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah. So let me pivot back to Shoba then, because Shoba, you brought the point up that there's really two kinds of folks out there in the world that are trying to learn. The one we were just talking about is that's very much that upper tier, right? Yeah. Other piece. And there's been a lot of discussion about this, like making the smart folks smarter. Talk a little, like what's come up with you as we've been talking about. What are you thinking?
Well, I do think that there's a lot going on at the other end of the spectrum, right? I mean, it's unfortunately, there probably never will be enough, right? So we see the gap. But it is, if you think about the large, the largest companies in the world, right? Walmart and other retailers, and even the auto sector that's really going through transformation, there is actually a lot of effort because it is much, much easier. Mobile learning and the barriers, the cost, I forget now, someone who talked about the risk to training your people because they will leave, right? That is also, but if you look at the bottom of the triangle, the low-skilled jobs, they're the ones that many of them are going away, right? But many of them need to move up. Right. And even if you take the Uber drivers or any of that, I mean, that they're being skilled through mobile learning that is very rapid learning, that is very low cost to produce and deploy. So I do think that that's quite exciting because the entity that is doing that skilling is the employer, the potential employer, because they have a need. They need people, right? Everywhere I go now, the world's biggest shortage appears to be restaurant staff. I don't know why they haven't come back to work, but everywhere I see baristas and waiters and cashiers and etc. So, and very often now I see training included because there is no choice, right? They're trying to get new people into the workforce. So I'm quite optimistic about that. I think it's the middle layer, as usual, that is going to get crushed in this. And there, it's really a mindset shift, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. So we're in the last little stretch here. I want to open it up just to make sure, is there anybody who's really just aching to, there's great, what I love about this platform that we use here is that there's what we say and what we're talking about in the little green highlighted boxes. And then there's the chat. Anybody find stuff in the chat that they want to highlight that's been a really interesting dialogue? I have a hard time keeping up with it while I'm trying to do this other thing, but John, Barry, Balaji, you guys want to?
Oh, this has been great. I think it's super interesting. I mean, it's interesting because when I reflect on the conversation, somebody asked, will universities get there? I'm helping Bharat Anand right now because he's now the vice provost in charge of advanced learning to actually launch Harvard Online. And just actually, Brandon, you should put it in the link, but Kareem Lakhani this morning just announced that he's going to do the open innovation class that a bunch of us have been involved in. So it's going to be a really great class, much like the HBAP class, a little bit different. But what was so interesting is Kareem and Bharat decided to pull that off of HBSO, Harvard Business School Online, because the minimum you can charge on HBSO is $1,600. And a lot of the courses are, especially in other departments, just you can't charge that much. So Harvard Online just launched this week as a test site to have those kinds of other things. I think we can throw that on there. But anyway, one of the really interesting things that I've been working with Bharat in this, and I think the thing that'll be the downfall for many universities is this huge discussion on who is the customer of the platform. And, while people said we need to have the learners at the center of this, the fact of the matter is it's really the tenured, professors that are really the customers, right? Like, hey, you can extend your class a little bit further through online. And so I think that's going to be a really, really difficult thing for universities to overcome, is that the weight and the power and the bureaucracy around tenure. So anyway.
It does seem though that one of the things that's happening is that the actual consumers of education are just kind of putting universities aside because it's too expensive, it's too hard, and they are really finding it in lots of different ways. The YouTube, I mean, I learn on demand on YouTube videos just like everybody else, right? And where I go to Stack Overflow to answer some programming question, and all of that continuum of learning, I think, is really shifted, where people are moving away from the classroom model, and even to we're not counting it in learning, but the reality is people are learning something and then going and trying it and doing, and that on the job training and these new platforms where you can go and try something as part of a challenge or try it in a micro tasking bit way. Those are new and interesting ways to do the learning that I think are kind of being stitched together in side gigs and in other ways. Shoba, you look like you want to say something.
Well, the other day I saw an ad for a 4-month MBA, right, for $2,000.
Wow.
And they're sold out, right? And so I think part of it also is the society that we've become, where everyone is in a hurry. There's ADD, and the thought of 3 or 4 year degrees is really, if you don't need it to get a job, why do it, right? And so I see that as, there's a luxury attitude that's emerging with a lot of the college degrees, right? Or the purpose of college has changed. So
yeah,
that's why I'm smiling. Yeah,
Mark, I think it's also a question of incentives, right? In some way, I think it feels like there's a strange parallel to draw between upskilling, healthy food and healthy exercise. Assuming that all of these are still available, there seems to be a culture of the lack of discipline for people to follow and do what's good for them. We can create all the infrastructure that we want, but in the end, it's still up to an individual's agency to go do it and go follow through.
Well, and honestly, this is where I find Albert's platform to be super interesting, because it kind of provides that that coaching bit to it. I think people need a certain amount of structure and a certain amount of agency and freedom, and it's getting that right match and incentives. Okay, Mark Hennett, you've had your hand up for a long time, but it wasn't bright yellow, so I didn't notice it. So sorry about that. Go.
That's okay, Steve. Thank you. I want to just pick up on a point that Shoba made much kind of earlier in this conversation, which was about the different motivations for upskilling in emerging and developed markets. And I want to create a bridge from that to different motivations for freelancing in emerging and developed markets. So there's a very interesting piece yesterday morning on the BBC's Asia Business Report. They had a lady on from Mercer who was giving a view on the Great Resignation. And her perspective was this, that whilst we're seeing it in both developed and emerging markets, the drivers for that are very different, right? Her point was that in the US, it's essentially driven by frustration and stagnant wages, and the fact that people are therefore needing to get skills for a different reason to those in markets in Asia, where that Great Resignation is being driven or fired by opportunity and optimism and rising wages. Yeah. And I think the point is this, that if as an organization, if as a community, we're seeking to advocate for the freelancer, we need to be able to recognize the fact that those freelancers are coming to that world for different reasons in different parts of the world. So I thought that was kind of quite an interesting perspective.
I love that, Mark. And Shoba, I think I credit you for bringing that out in the podcast, because I think that we don't spend enough time really understanding that. Mark, you maybe you were taking a breath.
I had one other point, which was this, that I also came away from that with a slight frustration, which is that they'd invited Mercer to go and give their view on that, and they hadn't come to CTW. And I think that we need to do something there, because I think that we've got perspective and that we ought to be on their radar, and that when those conversations are taking place and that they're casting around, that somebody off this group ought to be getting that invite to go and give the perspective. Great input. Barry, you're nodding your head, so that's good. John's nodding his head.
Absolutely.
Okay, we got 2 minutes. John, you want to close us out?
Yeah, that's great. No, I think this is a super important conversation. And I think, Steve and I, you and I talked a while ago. I think that the end state here, right, is to get upskilling and work more aligned, so that as soon as you finish a project, how do we change the mindset? So as soon as you finish a project internally or externally, or even in the crowd, that you get really quick feedback. That feedback is given to you on what you succeeded at and what you need skills in. And then a platform or employer can supply links to places to go to get those skills. And that cycle can come up faster, instead of this kind of long period of waiting and the self-responsibility of figuring out what skills might I need and how might I change, those kinds of things. It's really hard to be predictive. So I think this is, at the core of our mission at CTW, is to help, freelancers and folks in the open talent marketplace figure this stuff out. And it's important that we have these kind of conversations. And this is the beginning. So I really appreciate, Steve, your leadership here, and Shoba and Albert, definitely a variety of different points of view. I was really bummed because Cynthia Hansen was on, and she's in charge of the ADECO Foundation, but I don't think any of us realized that she was on. So, she would have had a really interesting perspective as well. But I'll make sure she gets a chance to get back on here and put her point of view in. I know she had to run to another meeting. So thanks so much, everybody. Love you guys, and always a great discussion.
Thanks, Albert. Thanks, Shoba.
Thanks, Shoba. Bye. Thanks, Steve, for leading things. Talk soon.
Great job, Steve. Great conversation, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Great to see everybody.